Evolutionary biology identifies sadness as an avoidant, negative state, a signal of loss. Yet humans actively seek out simulated tragedy for pleasure. This cognitive dissonance has puzzled foundational thinkers for thousands of years. Aristotle observed that humans derive distinct satisfaction from observing suffering portrayed in tragic theater. Nietzsche similarly grappled with the dissonance of aesthetic joy rooted in suffering. Schopenhauer attempted to reconcile the observer's joy with the subject's pain. Today, the universal expression of this paradox is the human preference for sad music. Conventional psychology explains this preference through external variables. It argues listeners are actually seeking mood regulation, reflecting on lyrical poetry, or enjoying nostalgic autobiographical memories. This matrix isolates the core phenomenon by removing those external factors. To understand the underlying mechanism, we must discard lyrics, memories, and familiarity. This leaves only the raw acoustic stimulus of unfamiliar instrumental sad music. When these psychological crutches are removed, the enjoyment of sad music is revealed as a biologically active physiological state, enabled by specific cognitive traits. Researcher Tuomas Eerola utilized factor analysis to map how listeners respond to unfamiliar acoustic tragedy. Factor analysis is a statistical method used to describe variability among observed correlated variables in terms of a lower number of unobserved variables called factors. This data plots three distinct phenomenological clusters: relaxing sadness, nervous sadness, and moving sadness. The clusters for anxiety and peacefulness are secondary. The primary anomaly is the data points aggregating here in moving sadness. This phenotype is a high-intensity affective experience. It combines profound sadness and being deeply moved with high aesthetic liking for the music. The assumption that sad music functions as a parasympathetic pacifier, safely soothing the nervous system, is inaccurate. This chart shows heart rate variability, or HRV, which measures the variation in time between consecutive heartbeats to track autonomic activity. HRV's spectral components measured during moving sadness demonstrate a spike in sympathetic nervous system activity, the body's physical stress response. Acoustic tragedy triggers a highly aroused sympathetic stress state that the brain successfully and remarkably converts into genuine pleasure. If the acoustic stimulus is identical and the physiological arousal is uniform, why do only a fraction of listeners experience this as pleasure? This breakdown shows the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, or IRI. The IRI is a multidimensional measurement tool used to assess trait empathy. Empathy acts as the cognitive gatekeeper that determines the listener's affective output. The purely emotional subscales, personal distress and empathic concern, do not drive the aesthetic conversion. Instead, the process relies on the two remaining quadrants. The fantasy trait measures the cognitive tendency to transpose oneself into fictional narratives and simulated situations. Perspective taking measures the intellectual capacity to temporarily adopt the point of view of another entity. This graph uses a receiver operating characteristic curve, or ROC curve, which measures the diagnostic accuracy of a metric. The fantasy trait accurately identifies the top quintile of listeners, acting as the diagnostic predictor for sadness enjoyers. The pleasure of moving sadness is conditional. It depends on the listener's baseline dispositional traits to project themselves into a simulated perspective. Researcher Ai Kawakami utilized path analysis to evaluate exact causality between these empathy traits and final preference. Path analysis is a statistical technique used to estimate the strength and direction of relationships within a causal model. This model used highly controlled minor key acoustic stimuli, like the compositions of Mikhail Glinka, to provide a uniform negative valence input. This is the resulting path model. On the left are the independent variables, fantasy and perspective taking. In the center are the mediating emotional responses. On the far right is the dependent variable, liking. Perspective taking actively drives emotional differentiation. It branches from the perspective taking node to light up both the sweet emotion and tragic emotion nodes simultaneously. This simultaneous processing allows the listener to experience the tragedy of the music without being overwhelmed by it. The fantasy trait operates differently. It bypasses the complex emotional sorting in the center and acts as a direct pipeline to preference. Together, this forms the vicarious emotion framework. High perspective taking and fantasy scores allow for rapid self-other differentiation the moment the music begins. The brain registers the acoustic cues of tragedy, but these specific traits allow the listener to appraise a lack of real-world threat. This permits the reward system to engage without triggering a true distress cascade. These cognitive traits utilize the music's tragedy to allow the listener to simulate threat. This converts an aversive acoustic signal into a rewarding vicarious experience. We can now assemble these variables into a single architectural blueprint of aesthetic pleasure. Step 1. The raw, unfamiliar minor key acoustic stimulus enters the auditory system. Step 2. The listener's cognitive traits, specifically high perspective taking and fantasy, intercept the signal to execute a self-other differentiation appraisal. Step 3. The autonomic nervous system enters a state of sympathetic arousal. Step 4. Because the threat is simulated, this arousal triggers the reward system, outputting the complex phenotype of moving sadness. This complete architecture maps exactly how the human brain processes and converts abstract aesthetic stimuli into profound pleasure. Aesthetic pleasure in this context is the result of the brain's empathy-driven capacity to simulate and process aversive signals in a safe environment.